Welcome to Some Things Considered, the podcast where we are obsessed with story. We celebrate creativity and we talk to cool people to find out what makes them tick. I'm your host, Sean Murphy. I'm an author. I direct the Center for Story at Shenandoah University, and I run the nonprofit 1455 Lit Arts. For more about me and what I do, check out seanmurphy.net. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Some Things Considered. This is the podcast where we're obsessed with story. We celebrate creativity, and I'm always happy to find fascinating people and talk to them about what makes them tick. I'm Sean Murphy, your host. I'm an author. I direct the Center for Story at Shenandoah University and run 1455, the nonprofit. For more about that good stuff, check out seanmurphy.net. But the best part of what I do is it gives me the opportunity to interact with people much cooler than I am. And today is absolutely no exception. I have one of my absolute favorite contemporary writer, cultural commentators, Jessa Crispin. Let me read her brief bio. And I have a feeling this audience is going to be in two parts. People that already are very aware of who Jessa is, and those that are delighted that they're going to have the opportunity to meet someone and say, how have I not known? And I need to start reading everything she writes. Jessa is the author of the books My Three Dads and The Dead Ladies Project, both published by the University of Chicago Press, The Creative Tarot, published by Touchstone, and Why I Am Not a Feminist, a Feminist Manifesto. She's written for myriad publications, as her bio says, some of which are still in existence. She's editor-in-chief of the publication The Culture We Deserve, which I read religiously. She has lived in many places, including Kansas, Texas, Chicago, Ireland, New York, and currently resides in Philadelphia. Jessa, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it. This is a tremendous honor to talk to you.
Thank you for having me. I'm thrilled.
Yay. Well, look, I'll concede defeat right up front. You are one of those guests where there's so many things I want to talk about. There's just no way we're going to get to it. But there's enough that we can talk about that's of immediate import. I'll just say teaser alert. We are going to have you back when your next book, What is Wrong with Men? Spoiler alert, everything drops this spring, and we'll talk specifically about that and the whole male issue, which I'm familiar with both on fiction and cultural levels. But I mean, where else to start? Why don't we pick apart the carcass of our November surprise? And I guess I'll start by saying, was it a surprise for you? And if so, why? Or if not, why?
It was more of a surprise than last time. Last time Donald Trump was elected. In 2016, I was pretty sure that it was happening. And all of the dread that was, 6 months in the work was exhausting. This time it was more of a surprise, and I have been trying to figure out why. Why was I surprised? And I think it's just that I just don't think that anybody understands what's going on anymore. I don't think that the media has a good sense of the political, cultural, social climate in the United States. And I couldn't trust anybody, right? Like in the lead up to the election, I couldn't trust the New York Times, but I also couldn't trust like the sort of Elon Musk social media, the sort of revamped algorithm he had going on in the push to put Donald Trump in office. And so I just couldn't get a grasp on anything. And so I think I defaulted into optimism, which is my weakness.
Yeah, you and me both, and many of our kindred spirits. I think the thing I would say, and I've on my Substack have readily and well, not happily, but I've totally accepted that I didn't anticipate this. But one thing I will say, I guess in our collective defense, is in terms of going a little bit deeper and kind of reading the room. I thought in 2016, but even more so this time, I was not getting the vibes that they thought they were going to win. And again, that could be a five-dimensional chess or what, but the stories breaking right before, like the people on the campaign were talking to each other. So in some ways, I think that exonerates us a teeny bit. Not that that matters, but I think what's more disturbing is that means that even the insiders within the Democratic Party or the Democratic media or our left-leaning cultural, we don't fully grasp what's going on. And what I've been wrestling with the last few weeks is we need some time. Like, was this more of a black swan? Like 2 more weeks either way, it would have gone differently. The margin was smaller than we initially thought, but it, no matter what spin we put on it, it's not a positive sign that after 8 years of this asshole, people are like, yeah, I want more.
Yeah, I do want to clarify that when I say I defaulted into optimism, I don't think that Harris was going to be a good president. And I
Yeah.
don't think that she was going to fix anything. And I don't think that like 4 more years of a Democratic president was going to fix any of the problems that we had. I
Yeah.
just didn't want it to go into the abyss. But here we are. Here we are, splashing around in the abyss.
Well, you know what though, Jessica, that's a great that opens up. I've got some definitely some specific areas that you have some expertise in that I'd love you to elaborate on. But speaking of the candidate, there was a lot of talk, and I mean, I was part of it, but in 16, like, well, if Bernie had been there, he would have won, and we'll never know. And I think I've tried to write some compellingly argued cases in either way, in either direction. What I've kind of sadly reconciled, if that's the right word, is that no matter what, I think it is safe to say with hindsight, Biden waited too long to get out. So whether
Mm.
whether Harris was the right person or not, or the best person, I think my optimism came from a place of it was such a truncated cycle that was actually going to work to our advantage because the media wasn't going to have the time to do the 16-month dissection of her character and her history. But I don't. So I guess what I'm saying is I don't really have a take, other
Mm.
than maybe it's clear now, and hindsight's always correct. But looking at Biden now, it's like, yeah, I think we were drinking the hopium or whatever. But what are your thoughts about who we went with, and could that have been changed, or should that have been changed?
Well, we should have had a primary, right? I mean, we should have. And it's
Yeah,
insane that we didn't. And,
yeah,
in after three whiskeys or so, I start thinking it was all a conspiracy, that this was all planned, but
yeah.
that's giving everybody too much credit that like they
Right,
wanted to bypass the process, and that's why Biden held on for so long. But that's insane because we all
right,
know that the Democrats can't plan
right.
anything, right? So
Yeah.
so if they had tried to do that on purpose, they would have fucked it up.
Right.
So, um, no, I think it's an incredibly non-democratic thing that they tried to get away with. And um and it was all about ego and pride and not what was better for anybody else. And if there's anything that is possible to take out of this moment is that if the Democrats could understand that they don't have any real moral high ground at this point, that would be great. That would be useful because they seem to, during the first Trump presidency, they were just kind of like, well, at least we're not the Republicans. I was like, yeah, but at least they're doing something. So,
Yeah.
yeah, you're in the muck too, so use it for God's sake, sling it, do something with it.
Yeah, and that brings up another interesting kind of rabbit hole, which is one thing you can say about the Republicans in general and Trump in particular is like him or not, he is the leopard that said, I'm gonna eat your face. And
Mm.
there's a distressingly large percentage of America. Well, actually, you know what? I shouldn't even frame it that way. There is a distressingly large percentage of people that are like, that works for me. But I think there's a decent chunk of our society that's like, I'm just tired of everyone bullshitting me. So
Yeah.
yes, Trump might be an asshole and he might not be good, but there's nothing more offensive than you looking me in the eye and telling me what you think I want to hear. And I do think Harris and Democrats in general suffer from this. Let's read the room as poorly as possible before we say what we're, is meant to be compelling campaign rhetoric.
Yeah, I don't know how we didn't figure this out during the first Trump administration. You know, the whole idea that we were going to keep democracy together by fact checking Trump's statements, like that's not like everyone already knows. Everyone
Yeah.
knows he's a liar, he's a bullshitter. But
Yeah.
he doesn't lie about certain things that are incredibly important, which is that people are not having a great time. And that is the thing that they want to hear. They don't want someone to tell them, actually, crime statistics are down by 0.5% or whatever the fuck it is. And
Right.
the economy is actually doing really good on paper, et cetera, et cetera. You know, people
Right.
don't have houses. People
Yeah.
don't have benefits from their jobs, and they don't feel like their jobs are secure in any way. There's no sense of like, I'm doing okay and I have the possibility of doing okay 10, 20 years from now as well. There's a
Yeah.
sense of like everything is incredibly precarious. Everything could go to shit at any minute. People do
Yeah.
not want to be told crime statistics are down slightly.
Yeah, and one of the things, Jessa, that I've become convinced of. I mean, I've been a unfortunate, and I will unfortunately been like a political animal my whole adult life. Like I grew up in DC. Like maybe it's just baked into my blood. But having witnessed this, the what the Democrats still haven't seemingly figured out is you do need. Well, it's nice to have facts on your side, but it's not cynical to say that's not nearly enough because you need people to feel and you need to show people that what you're trying to do is in their best interest or what the bad guys are doing is hurting everybody. And I
Mhm.
still never hear that enough from Democrats that think that they can call upon people's better angels and that will, I mean, the whole be better crap, like they go low, we go high. I that was something that I thought after 16 we had learned. Although, again, I have to say in fairness, like I can't help but say, but I do think Harris understood if I'm too aggressive, the New York Times is to be the first people critiquing, the shrill, angry black woman. So I don't know. I mean, but their messaging is terrible.
Yeah. But it's also, yeah, I don't think that the Democrats have learned anything. As soon as the Obama nostalgia started, that seemed like we were doomed. As soon as people started getting nostalgic for President Obama on the left, I was like, do you not know that this is why people voted for Trump? People voted for Trump because of Obama. It's not it's not because of racism, it's not because of misogyny. They voted for Trump because Obama disappointed them so severely. And so
Yeah.
then to just like try to tie it. Oh, she's wearing the same color suit. Oh, this is, she's using the same slogans. Oh, he's at the conference. Oh, da, 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 da. Yeah, I
Right.
mean, it's like the people don't understand. People don't understand what happened in 16. They don't understand what happened in '08. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, I think we are a little bit fucked. But that's the despair coming out.
Well, it is, and before I want to drill in a little bit on the red state, blue state conundrum. But let me run this by you. I've written uh, more than a couple of times. I acknowledge that none of us know anything, and there's different ways to interpret history. But I felt at the time one of the very few things that I'll do, like the Babe Ruth point, and say, no, I called this shot, was when the Wall Street meltdown was happening and we started bailing out Wall Street. I was writing in my blog at the time. This is a generational opportunity for Obama, in particular, and the Democrats in general, to say, like it or not, we're able to critique it too. This is what government's for. Without some guardrails, without some regulations, without some policing of the worst of us, these guys will run rampant. And I felt like there was an arrogance and a kind of, we won such a landslide. People understand that. And I feel like, and I'm not saying this is an original thought, but I got a lot of pushback when I first was writing about this. I thought the Tea Party filled that vacuum of that
Yeah.
anger, people saying, why are we bailing out the same people that should be behind bars? And to me, I can connect a dot from that to January 6th and say, people are angry. And if you keep going after the little guys, and I'm not even talking about January 6th in particular, but just the notion of throw a few people to the wolves, that's not stopping the systemic abuses. Do you agree that and again, it's too easy to just blame Obama, but at the time I was apoplectic because I thought this is teed up on a platter for them to really show cause and effect and say, this is why there's those pesky regulations. This is why we have the IRS. This is why rich people should be taxed and pay their fair share. But they blew it. And I don't know if we'll ever, Trump has taken all that populist anger and repurposed it.
Well, yeah, but also like the Tea Party was the first time that the attack of these people are just racist was sort of launched in a way
Right.
of dismissing them and not even trying to figure out what this was about. Um, and so then it was just like they wouldn't be doing this if this was George W. Bush. They wouldn't be doing this if it was whatever. So it has to be, what is the difference? The difference is Obama's race, and it can't possibly be anything other than that, right? So these people are racist, these people are misogynist, blah, blah, blah. And so then we don't have to listen to them or care about their concerns in any way. But yeah, I mean, letting people lose their homes and bailing out banks, people should have gone to prison. People should have lost their jobs. People should have, become bankrupt, and they
Yeah.
didn't.
Yeah.
And I don't know how people don't figure out that there are consequences for a generation, at least for that kind of thing, of people, you have a generation of people, two now, who came of age into a time of massive instability, but you also have like a generation who grew up into like housing insecurity, who grew into this caretaker responsibility because everybody lost their pensions, right? And so the long-term stability that was supposed to be available for people in their old age disappeared. And so now their children are having to take care of their parents, financially, physically, etc., which was not in anybody's expectations for how a life was going to be lived. So, um, you can, it's easy to sort of blame people for not being able to get over their disappointment. But at the same time, like, why is it always the same people who are expected to just get over it, just get over it? And now we're in a position where, if you make enough money and you stub your toe, the government is going to come and kiss it to make it all better. But you can set yourself on fire on the lawn of the White House, and people are just going to call you a racist.
Right. Right. Well, I think that actually that tees up exactly where I wanted to get you to opine, which is I think and also in 2016 and maybe even 20, we collectively fell into a, well, what we're gonna do about the red states. I think this election, there are going to be some opportunities for learning and improvement, hopefully. One of them is dispelling, I think, this comforting illusion that, well, those of us in the blue states have our shit together, and we got to get these dum-dums. The margins and the demographics do not support that. If only, X, Y, and Z. I know you've written very perceptively and convincingly, but also more importantly, with experience about red state, blue state. And I guess I would just, before I ask you to talk about that, I would say I've always kind of facetiously wrestled with the question is it that we don't understand red states enough, or is it that it's blue state assholes on either coast that become the spokespeople, which is almost admitting defeat before you start because it's so condescending and elitist. But maybe talk a little bit about where you have been and what you still think, or how that is changing. Is it not changing, and et cetera?
Yeah, well, I grew up in a town of 1,200 people in Kansas. and it is an agricultural community. And it's, Kansas is not just a red state. It's like the mythological, archetypal version of the red state, right? Like it pulls on, from the Wizard of Oz to, every other goddamn thing. A sort of
Right.
fantasy version of traditional values, um, the God-fearing family, all that kind of bullshit. Um, so yeah, it is a it's an interesting experience. Coming from a place like that in, coming of age in the 90s, these sorts of times where there was a sense of um it wasn't so difficult to get access to the culture in the 90s if you were from these kind of off-center places.
Mhm.
You still had alternative newspapers and magazines in even like midtown or mid-sized towns and cities. You still had
Yeah.
kind of local media that was at least somewhat funded, you know, um,
Right.
at least it existed. And
Yeah.
then you also had just sort of regional papers, programs, and so on. And then, it's no longer like that. You basically don't exist in the culture unless you are from New York, LA. And that is basically, and also not just if you're from New York or LA, but if you're like a creative, which is a noun now, in New York or LA. Basically, no other people exist according to the publishing industry, according to Netflix, according to et cetera, et cetera. So you have essentially like a 2% of the population that all went to the same schools, all are in the same place, and they decide what's going on in the country. And they have no fucking idea. So it's interesting if you stand outside of that, because you know that they're full of shit, but there's nothing that you can do to convince them that that might be true.
Yeah. Um,
So yeah.
well, yeah, for sure. And I think another nugget of optimism or hope that I'll take out of kind of this still burning corpse of what's left of democracy. I do think that the antipathy now toward Bezos and the Post and LA Times. I do think there's opportunity there, whether we seize it, whether it's just going to disappear. I do like that some of this very overdue articulation of what you just described, this insufferable smugness of, very well insulated and financed creatives, never mind the media, the creative class, the self-love of that world. I do think there's some cracks there, and Substack for me anyway has been interesting to follow. Like I feel like the blogosphere was the Wild West of sorts. I mean, a total cliche, um, but it was difficult to get a foothold because it was the Wild West. But I think
Hmm.
Substack has become this thinkers and artists and intellectuals. It's a platform that prioritizes meaningful engagement. Whether it happens or not is almost irrelevant. But there is this genuine alternative, and I think like Paul Krugman leaving the New York Times, he hasn't announced yet that I'm aware of, but he's going to end up on Substack, and good, because he's going to
Yeah.
have no, he's going to be unfettered. He'll make more money. So again, I don't want to be overly optimistic or naive, but I like that 10 years ago, I think you could have said what you just said, and I would have shrugged and said, yeah, it sucks. And hopefully that changes. I do think that there's reason to hope that now that the media people are getting laid off, people that have written books aren't getting new contracts. That when you start
Hmm.
feeling that kind of pain, we're seeing in that space what we hope is going to happen to the MAGA fanatics, which is once you start getting your face eaten, you're going to pay attention. Well, maybe that's also happening on our side, which is welcome.
I don't think so. I don't think so because like, like the people because he is going to start a Substack, and the people who are losing their book contracts just start a Substack. And so Substack immediately has gotten gentrified by
Mm,
the sort of washouts of the media center. So it's still just like, it's just like, oh, so it's not the center of hell, but it's like the third circle of hell or whatever. Like it's, but the people who don't come from that are just keep getting pushed farther and farther to the margins because
yeah,
um, no one with an MFA ever wants to do anything else than write. Because,
yeah,
they're $100,000 in debt. They paid for this. They paid for a career to be a writer. Where's the
yeah.
fucking career? So whatever it takes. I mean, I'm old and cynical and broke. So I have a different sort of experience on this, but
Yeah.
it's, if you don't have a college education, in the United States of America, they then you basically don't exist. You don't exist to the culture, you don't exist to the politicians except for Trump. You don't exist to your employer. Um, and you are seen as like a sort of disposable, exploitable body, and that's about it. And so I just don't think that there's any space that is going to open up for any of us. And you know, that's just the way it is. I don't think it's going to get better, honestly.
So I appreciate that pushback. I'll trump you and say I'm even more cynical. That hope is coming from having expected it was never going to change. I think what we're seeing in the media sphere and the literary world in particular, is tiny and insignificant as it is in terms of all the issues we're talking about on a kind of global level. It's really mirroring what happened in the music industry at speed now, which is musicians finally had to deal with the fact that albums are being made, but CDs, like that model is gone. So even if we wanted it to come back, it's gone. And I think the MFA factory to teaching to publishing books, with your friends at the big five, that world is gone. So I
Mhm.
can't help but see there being opportunity for voices that at least in the past would have been shut out entirely. The system is still completely unfair. I take your point and agree with it that being connected and being educated gives you a leg up. But I think in an info overload kind of media sphere, I think those advantages are being mitigated in ways that at least can allow the possibility of voices we don't typically hear arising out of the mess. I mean, in other words, put succinctly, we're no longer going to need to rely on like freaking Thomas Friedman and David Brooks to tell us what's really happening across the country.
Hmm. Okay. I don't agree.
Tell me more, because you articulated it, but tell me what's going to prevent, like, if now even the good guys, and I say that very facetiously, but even liberal readers who read the New York Times with a disdain, but it is the New York Times, are now saying they've completely sold out.
hmm
There does need to be some voices that fill that void. Who's going to fill it? Or are you saying that no one's going to fill it?
No, I mean people are unsubscribing from the New York Times, and well, actually not the New York Times. The New York Times keeps growing, but with the uh controversies with the LA Times and Washington Post refusing to do an endorsement, both had these online organization to get people to unsubscribe, right? And it worked. Like tens of thousands of people unsubscribed. It was really much more successful than I thought it was going to be. Um, but what you see more and more now is not people looking for more and different voices. What you see are people just like avoiding just like doing media avoidance. You see people leaving X in greater numbers and they're migrating to other sites. You see people unsubscribing from newspapers, magazines, etc., at a greater rate than they're going elsewhere. So I think probably people are just shutting themselves off into sort of like a Netflix dream space. I don't think that they're sort of I don't know that they're necessarily hungry for more information or different voices. I think they just want to be left alone with their private miseries, which I
Yeah.
don't, I have to do this. I do this thing every year for the Telegraph. I don't know why they make me do it, but I they asked me to do like a roundup of all the self-help books that come out like at the end of the year, beginning of the year, like January. Everyone's like, "Oh God, why am I such a overweight alcoholic? Like, why am I so bad at everything?"
Yeah.
And so then there are all these books that are like, here's how to be less of a disgusting loser. And so they make me read all of them, and then I have to like come up with some jokes about it or something. But
Right.
I noticed like this year, it's all about retreat. It's all about doing less. It's all about, turning people down, not helping others, self-care, but in different language because now self-care is problematic. But it is like a kind of doing less,
Right.
spending less time thinking about other people's problems, focusing, conserving, retreating. It's all about that. And I think that that's kind of where we're headed, at least for a couple of years. It's like people just shutting everything off, everything out. And so, yeah, no, so I don't know that people are sort of casting about for different ideas. I think, and especially as this sort of, you know, one of the reasons why I think that the right was so politically successful is you have uh, these podcasters, these Twitch streamers, and so on, who produce like 3 hours of content every single night, right? They do these marathon long streaming every single day, and people are sort of watching that not necessarily because they agree with it or they're like even looking for something, looking for an explanation or looking for an opinion or looking for, some sort of illumination of what's going on. It's just a way of shutting out other noise. It's like, this guy wears a hat that I agree with. So, I'm just going to pay attention to him. And if I do that for 3 hours a day, then that's 3 hours a day. I don't have to listen to anybody else and I don't have to think. And so I think that's kind of the future. I think the future belongs to the people who can podcast and stream the most.
So I concur. I would say that that actually gets to the more fundamental issue, I think. And again, as much as I beat up on the Democrats as much as anybody, I think, but I will say it is more difficult when you have a bigger tent in terms of philosophy, in terms of inclusivity or the desire, at least the attempt to be inclusive. When you don't have the freedom to just check off three boxes and go guns, taxes, and men in charge or whatever those handful.
Immigrants.
Yeah, I mean that is easier, and I think you're also really elucidating what we've seen, like the curative experience where people now, even though there's this irony of there's never been more information, more ways to get more voices, people have also taken what in typical American fashion, right? Unprecedented access to everything. Let me figure out ways to set it up so I only hear all the time what I want. I think those people are lost. But what fills me with rage is seeing people a week after the election go, we just need a liberal Joe Rogan. And it's like, first of all, that's impossible because Joe Rogan appeals to people that are dumb. So you're not going to be able to duplicate that with
I
a
don't think that that's necessarily fair. I mean, I obviously I don't think Joe Rogan has a intellectual audience. But I don't know. Joe Rogan is a liberal. Joe Rogan has always been a liberal up until the moment he endorsed Donald Trump. So
Mhm.
I don't, he endorsed Bernie Sanders, and
Yeah.
he's had Michael Pollan on repeatedly. He's had a lot of like sort of writers for the New Yorker in his studio.
Mhm.
So I don't know. I don't think that Joe Rogan is necessarily the person that he I don't recognize the version of him that people talk about when people talk about him.
Okay.
I don't think that's actually who he is. But like I do feel like him getting lumped into this sort of intellectual dark web, whatever. What was that called?
Making it the intellectual dark web.
Yeah, was it called that? That's so stupid. But I do think like lumping him in with all with like actual racists and crazy people.
Right.
Joe Rogan he's a Leo. He's just a dude. He just wants to hang out, you know? He's a Leo with a sun conjunct Jupiter. He just wants to hang out and talk shit, you know? Um, so there you go. Sometimes it's stupid, but that's about it.
All right. So we'll put a pin in that for a future because I take your pushback respectfully and I don't violently push back about well, no, he actually is a vaccine denied. Like, fair enough. He does enjoy the discourse. I think he's extremely gullible. I think
Oh, sure.
He's got Musk like just tell me what I makes me feel smarter. I'm totally gonna endorse this without any critical thought. But leaving that aside, I think that actually gets to one of the things I've been remiss to not get you to opine on more, which is you wrote a wonderful and it was very illuminating to me piece about your father talking about I don't feel at home in any party, and I think
Mm.
that is a crystallization of because we get into cliche speak, right? Like, well, what about the flyover states? Those issues do have to be addressed. But speaking about someone that has convictions, that is intelligent, and is saying, basically screaming, I don't feel represented by either party. Woe to the politicians of our future that aren't hearing that more clearly and doing something, hiring the right people or reading the right books to understand and speak to that. Maybe talk a little bit about that piece and how that situation maybe in some ways epitomizes what we're talking about in terms of the divide and being feeling represented by the dominant cultural voices.
Yeah, I mean, well, the Republican Party has turned into essentially a cult, right? And so the people who win elections as Republicans now are not recognizable as Republicans from even like 15, 20 years ago, right? And so you basically get, these sort of big personality types like Marjorie Taylor Greene, or you get these sort of, just hard, I am just an obstacle to everyone who wants to accomplish anything like Josh Hawley. Um,
Yep.
and basically, very few people, I won't say no, but very few people that are actually elected officials in the Republican Party represent anything that is recognizable as Republican policy positions, right? As far as fiscal conservatism or respect for institutions and respect for strengthening institutions, including, education and so on. So my father is a lifelong, I don't know if that's true, lifelong Republican. I'll just say that, and he can yell at me later on the phone if I get it wrong. Um, and he voted for Harris in this election and Biden in I mean, he hates Trump. He hates Trump. I think he couldn't make himself vote for Hillary Clinton, and so he voted for, I don't know, like a libertarian or something hideous in 2016. Um, but essentially, he is a lifelong Republican who no longer feels any sort of association with the Republican Party as it currently exists, and also doesn't really feel at home with the Democrats as they currently are, but has sort of like begrudgingly sort of joined their cause. But you know, he still lives in Kansas, and I want to say 12 years ago, they elected Sam Brownback, who used to be a senator, and he bankrupted the state, right? Like just
Yeah.
destroyed everything about the state. Um, Completely destroyed the budget, fucked over schools, fucked over everything that he could possibly think, drained all the coffers, and was like, I'm doing such a good job. And I think that was the moment when my father understood that he had no place in this party that was not about conservative values, but was just about recklessness and resentment and revenge on some sort of imagined slight against some imagined enemy in their heads. So he feels, he feels politically homeless. He feels like he doesn't see himself reflected culturally, politically, whatever. Um, and it's sort of a difficult thing for him because it's really caused difficulties with him in his friendships, with his family, because some have taken that curve into Trump land, into delusion
Yeah.
and conspiracy and so on. Some of them sort of stayed with it, with the Republican Party on that. And my father finds himself at a loss of how to even communicate with people who say that they agree with him, but clearly there's no common ground. So yeah, I my new thing is that we should gentrify the Republican Party. But that's just me.
Well, how many, if you had to just speculate, not totally unfair question, I don't expect you to go on record, but if you, because now I'm very, very curious, and I don't know what my take would be. What would we guess the percentages of people, obviously in red states, but through the country that are more like your dad than not, in terms of what is the opportunity for either party that can speak to these disaffected folks who still care, still remember a world where opposition wasn't the goal. Um,
Hmm.
are there pockets of meaningful opportunity within those demographics?
Yeah, of course. I mean, I think that if you look at the political situation in Kansas, it sort of immediately reveals itself to be much more complicated than the sort of red state moniker. We have,
Yeah.
I don't know why we said we, I don't live there anymore. But I guess there is some sort of, angry hometown pride somewhere in there. But we have a Democratic governor at the moment, which we have had, I think, since Brownback left office. I think ever since then, there's only been a Democrat in the governor office. And then we had when the Roe v. Wade was overturned. Kansas was one of the first states to have a referendum to guarantee that the Constitution would protect abortion rights in the state.
Yep.
And abortion rights in Kansas, that's a very long, bloody history with assassinated doctors, with the Summer of Mercy, with violent protests. Like that's been an issue basically since I paid attention to politics at all.
Right.
And so it has a complicated, hard one political history with these subjects, and these subjects are not handled lightly. So you
Mhm.
do have this kind of like fanatical, very Christian segment of the Republican Party in Kansas, but for the most part, everyone is pretty centrist there. And so they've sort of managed it through protecting abortion rights to make sure that that's not going to disappear, keeping the Democrat governor. And that I think that when you vote for president, it's different than when you're voting for governor because just you're not just voting for who you want, but you're kind of voting in a way of like, I want to identify myself in a particular way to the
Yeah.
rest of the nation. I want to communicate something about myself, my values, my community to the rest of the nation. And so that's always gone Republican in Kansas. But I don't think that that's a completely uniform understanding of the political situation in Kansas.
Yeah, I think what you just really underscored is that, people are much more complex. Their motivations are at once more discernible, but also complicated than we've been led to believe. And I can't help but find, potential opportunity there. But it gets me back to my big, issue, which is the Democrats traditionally, historically, have been horrible at storytelling and narrative and persuasion. Um, to me, one of the many reactions I've had kind of watching disgust, interest, inevitable, watching the CEO, the healthcare, assassination. At least we know definitively, that crosses party lines. That anger now,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know, the anger at billionaires. Elon Musk, and we that could be like Trump and Musk. You could write a position paper about. Well, he was Iron Man and Trump was the apprentice. Like I think there is a black swan element of some of these assholes who inexplicably appeal. But someone like a healthcare CEO that's like, no, my business model is to deny, is like that. That's just good business. That's a hard position to campaign on. I have to hope that Democrats get more humanities majors. I don't know who, or more lapsed Fox News writers, and understand how to succinctly hammer home like a genuine awareness and concern for people that are suffering.
Well, they also need to like reverse the changes that have been going on. I mean, if you look at like what the Democrats have to offer somebody in Kansas, their agricultural policy is shit. Their healthcare policies are shit. Kansas in particular, you've seen the privatization of the healthcare system through Kansas, through the Midwest in general. And the first thing that anybody does is shut down rural clinics and hospitals because they don't make enough money. So who gives a shit if somebody bleeds to death in the 3 hours that it takes for them to get to the hospital in Wichita or whatever? And so you do see worsening health outcomes. You see uh, catastrophic suicide rates for farmers. And these are very real things that have not heard anybody in the sort of national level Democratic Party talk about. I don't know, Clinton maybe. So yeah, I think that's not great. So
Yeah,
it's not
well,
like, the idea is that we want people to vote for Kamala, and the reason that they're sort of given if they're not being sort of served by the Democratic Party is like, well, things will be worse for some people, and we're supposed to care about these theoretical people, whether that's like immigrants or trans children or women needing abortions or whatever, more than we care about our own lived experience and our own expectations for how our life is supposed to go. And so I just don't think that flies. I just don't think that flies when everything is falling apart. It's nice to be empathetic. It'd be great if somebody would be empathetic to farmers in Kansas.
yeah, here, and I think also, again, in hindsight, I'm sure some of the folks in that circle are starting to kind of reconcile or figure this out, that democracy is at stake, kind of on a theoretical level, but
Hmm.
that's not as compelling as you think it is when someone can't afford medical, they're one illness away from bankruptcy. Maybe
Yeah.
personalize it, maybe make the stakes a little more universal and understandable so that it doesn't become, almost this scolding like, well, if you vote for Trump, you're democracy's falling apart. I think there's a good section of our society that are like, society left me behind a long time ago, so I don't care if it all burns down. And that is,
Yeah.
I think those people are gettable, but they're not gettable with the current messaging that we're rolling out.
Yeah, it was funny because in the lead up to the election, you know, the ads I was getting, I mean, so I live in Pennsylvania and we were officially a swing state, so we were getting
Pummeled with.
5 mailers a day. We were getting only political ads for everything that we watched on any service, on YouTube, on et cetera, et cetera. And so it was getting like these constant Kamala ads, and they were all about we're not going back and democracy is at stake. And, you know, that sort of it was the repeat of Trump saying he was going to be a dictator on day one, blah, 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 on repeat. So it's like, and then I made the mistake of watching the JD Vance interview on the Tom Dillon show when it came out, and then the ads immediately switched over to pro-Trump ads. It was like they are going to trans your kids against your will, and so it was this weird thing of like I understand like against that the democracy is at stake just I it just doesn't have the same it doesn't invoke fear, it doesn't invoke anything. It's just such an abstract concept. It's like, you know, great if they take away democracy but give me, you know, better loans with lower interest rates so I don't lose the farm that's been in my family for 4 generations, you know, fuck it, who gives a shit about democracy?
Right. Right. Like democracy for whom?
Yeah,
Yeah,
what has democracy ever given me, you know?
right. So to me, I think, I guess when I'm straining for kind of nuggets of hope and optimism.
You shouldn't have invited me on the
No, no,
podcast.
no. Well, believe me, I'm there, but it helps to talk through this stuff. But my aforementioned naivete, let's just naivete about
Mhm.
the media, for the unlike in 16 at least, there's I'm sensing, and I'm on the East Coast. I mean, genuine antipathy. Maybe it'll wear off, but people are like, I'm done with the Washington Post. That plus maybe the Democrats, and I'm not going to say the whole party because that's way too optimistic, but enough meaningful pockets realize, yeah, maybe we shouldn't have the same consultants that we have every cycle that always lose,
Yeah,
don't do this right.
yeah.
It's we're learning the most painful lessons, the most painful ways. But I guess what if someone were to ask me, and I will in turn ask you, well, so what do you think? It's like I'm not completely like it's over. We lost, and it's never coming back. I think that what frustrates me more than the results are that I think the game is still winnable on a lot of levels, but we just need better storytelling. We need better messengers. I don't know, messaging.
But I also think that like the thing that the Democrats have consistently failed to do for 20 years now plus um,
Mm.
is hold people accountable, right? You still have people who are working in media who supported the war in Iraq and have never sort of we never haven't even done like a mea culpa, just like pretended like it just never happened, right?
Yeah.
Those people should lose their jobs. You have people in the Democratic Party who are, you know, making millions of dollars off of other people's suffering via the stock market. Those people should lose their jobs. And people who ruined the Harris campaign, who ran it into the ground, should publicly lose their jobs. But if there's no sense of accountability, then you can't show people that you have learned from your mistakes. And so when you come at them again, why should they trust you if there hasn't been a process of like, look, we understand who fucked up and how we fucked up and why we fucked up. And we have made these changes to try to come to terms with that. And this is how we are moving forward. I don't mean it in a kind of like Stalin-esque, you know, show trial kind of way, but a
No, no.
real kind of like there have to be consequences for getting things this wrong, because the only people now who feel consequences for the mistakes of the Democratic Party are the voters who are suffering because hospitals are disappearing, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
So someone else should feel pain for a while, I think.
I,
Even
well, I
just
mean,
pain.
here's a horrific thought. I think there's going to be enough pain to go around across all the demographics we've talked about, the American public writ large, the media, echo complex, the literary and academic worlds. I do think the pain is going to be meaningful for once, and I do think I'll just continue. I guess I've said this word several times, but I'll be optimistic that there's opportunities in this kind of implosion for more reliable, fresh voices to emerge. I do suspect that there's going to be less tolerance for these very people you're talking about. And I think partly because the traditional model is, well, they've been doing it for so long, that's who we have to go to. I think that's the residue of the Clinton machine and even the Obama
Sure.
machine. So maybe we're at least, again, very painful. And I say this with empathy, not only for my own community, but like the whole world. But if we can learn from this cycle's, we can flush some of that garbage, and let's hope that brighter minds are in a position to fill some of those very dire gaps.
Yeah, I do think it's funny though how much that the New York Times is freaking out about the assassination of the CEO of UHC. Like they are running multiple op-eds a day of like, guys, it's not funny. They
Oh
had like
yeah.
a whole roundtable today of like, why do people like this guy? It's like, you guys are fucking stupid. You should know
Yeah.
why people don't like this guy. But I think, they they have more, the people who work at the New York Times have more in common with the CEO of UHC than they do with the people who are suffering from the decisions made by the CEO of UHC. And so their loyalty is always going to go to that person. And I think it's problematic. We used to have a newspaper and mass media in this country that was run by the working class. This used to be a working class industry that you learned through apprenticeship, not through grad school. And I think that when you have people who are indistinguishable in demographic from the people who are in power, who are running the newspapers, who are running the even the tabloids, even TV news, and so on, they're always going to take the side of the people that resemble them the most. You need a working class person to punch people in the face because they don't give a shit.
Yeah, I'm going
And
to
this
butcher
is
the
my
quote, but right there's that the classic. Gosh, is it Sinclair Lewis? It's difficult to get a man to understand something when his salary depends on him not understanding it or whatever. Like
yeah, yeah,
there's
yeah.
there's a lot of that, and in fact I think that could be, now that I think about it, that could be thus far the epitaph for the lack of progress politically and culturally in the 21st century. That's it, because that cuts across academic, intellectual, media, and political ecosystems.
Yeah, yeah. And you know, there's been a lot in the about like anti-elite sentiment, both in the sense of like, don't be so mean to the elites, they have feelings too, or in the sense of like, fuck the elites. But the fuck the elites pieces are always written by people who teach at Harvard.
Yeah.
They always like work at a think tank, or they teach at Harvard or something, and they're like, the elites are out of touch. Why are you writing this? God's sake.
Well, so that's a good full circle. We can definitely pin that up on the bulletin board and revisit that this spring. I'm I'm more on the side of optimism that because of that very thing that you just described, there's just a collective shrug of, I see in the byline this person teaches at Harvard. I'm not even going to read the article. I just think that there's less patience for the same idiots writing the same thought pieces. So that's where my optimism is for people like yourself.
Hmm.
And, I mentioned Krugman, but like I'm talking about the people who have built their own brand because their writing and thinking is good. And hopefully they become popular and beloved. Hell yeah. But the foundation is they've earned the street cred and it wasn't handed to them. If I read one more piece from someone where it's like, oh, of course their father or grandfather was also at the New York Times. I mean, that is starting to at least be ferreted out. And I think we're starting to turn a corner on that. So if I'm wrong, well, I'm wrong. But I'll end on that note and say I'm a little optimistic that there's pockets of opportunity within there. And again, yeah, I'll patronize you, people like you, to emerge and have more red voices, because that'll help us.
Yeah, my husband keeps trying to get me to run for governor of Kansas, but I don't want to do it. So I'm not going to do it, but
You're,
we'll see.
the poets are the unacknowledged legislators. We need you on that other wall
I
doing
think
exactly what you're doing.
I would become the governor of Kansas, and then, I would mention Shakespeare or something, and then they'd burn me as a witch. So I don't think it's a good idea.
The good news is she got us all affordable health care. The bad
The
news
bad
is
news
she
is we
reads
had to
these
burn her as a
she reads
witch.
these books by gay people. We'll figure it out.
We'll figure it out.
Well, I'm proud of us because we didn't. I mean, the lowest hanging fruit is what's the matter with men, literally and figuratively.
Mm.
So much meat on that bone. And yeah, that's still going to be relevant and topical 6 months from now. So, Jessa, it's so fun to chat with you. And I'll put this in I mean, anyone that can see my face knows I'm really thrilled. But I just want to thank you, like face to face, for the writing and the work you do. I mean, you are fighting the good fight. It does make a difference. And you're giving a lot of people, trust me, that don't feel a lot of hope right now, reason to believe that there are still sensitive, intelligent people who suffer fools lightly and are willing to lead the charge, unafraid. So I thank you, and I know I'm on thanking you for a lot of other people.
Thanks. That's very nice of you.
Heartfelt and genuine. And I'm also not just saying that so you promise to come back and we'll talk about your when it drops.
Sure.
All right, Jessa, and people can find you. I'll put this in the write up, but it's jessacrispa.com, right?
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
Yep. And yeah, I'll put all the good links in and let people discover you. But thank you for being here. We'll talk to you soon. And folks, thanks for tuning in. Go to seanmurphy.net for more information about all this stuff. Get involved, send future guests our way, and support your independent artists. Follow a few Substack people. Prove me right that we can make a difference on an organic level. And be safe and stay sane. We'll see you soon. Thanks for tuning in to Some Things Considered. Find out more, including how to be a guest, at seanmurphy.net. Reminder, we are obsessed with story and celebrating creativity. Also, we're here to advocate for the arts by any means necessary. Drop us a line, get involved, and support our creatives who are the lifeblood of our culture. I'm Sean Murphy. See you on the next episode of Some Things Considered.